Julian Assange probably is still in Belmarsh prison in the UK, wanting to, probably waiting for his own fate to be decided by the British government. But for now, take us through the work that you do there, you personally and your team members at CCIJ.
CCIJ.
Why did
Okay.
you start up? What have you been doing?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So what we do at CCIJ, Umar, I appreciate the question, is we bring together investigative, data, and visual journalists as equal partners from the beginning of projects to carry out ongoing investigations into key global issues. We have a very strong commitment to working with and learning from journalists who might not have a chance to do that type of investigation, often emerging journalists who are earlier in their careers, and to working with and learning from under-resourced and often underserved communities. And so related to that, we have a strong belief in training. So what we do is our project and our community started at the African Investigative Journalism Conference at Wits University in 2016. So I had done some work around state-sponsored lotteries and realized that there's not just one country or one company, but that there's a global industry and a very small number of companies that are highly influential in countries throughout the world, and people scratching off tickets who disproportionately are poor people and often poor people of color. So I brought this group together and said, let's dig into the industry, but not just one country, but the entire system as much as we can. So we did that project. It's still ongoing, particularly with great impact in South Africa, where our friend and colleague Ray Joseph has done tremendous work. And then from there, we presented that work at the African Investigative and Global Investigative Journalism Conference the following year. And this led to a process where a woman approached me and Ray Joseph and talked about supporting us to become an organization. So this took a couple of years, and then we started during the pandemic and so on. We're still early days in our journey, but we've continued with the lottery project. We published in South Africa, in the United States, in Mali, in Bolivia, in England. We published in French and English and German. So that was that investigation. We've done an ongoing look, actually a certain number of stories in Nigeria, looking at access to clean water in about 12 or 13 different countries. And then toward the end of last year, we also launched a project about gender-based violence by state actors in Eastern and Southern Africa. So we've done different topics, but the consistent element is that in all that we do, we bring those commitments to visual, data, and investigative as equal partners, to working with these emerging journalists, to training, and to working with and learning from individuals, families, and underserved communities.
So if I understand you correctly, you have the money, so you go and get investigative journalists, local journalists in Africa and other parts of the world, work together with them, give them the money, support them with whatever equipment you have, in order for them to go and uncover those hidden stuff, do the investigation. Then they report back to you. You publish, and then you release the information to the world. Is that what you do?
Well, yes, and we work in a number of different ways. So in certain cases, we have the money and we commission the stories. In other cases, we get a grant, and then the grant money pays for the stories. In other cases, we go together with the journalists for the money. So we work financially in a number of different ways, and then we work very closely with the journalists. We meet often. We had a terrific collaboration with Hume Angle in Nigeria, where
of course.
Yeah, beautiful project and a wonderful team. And so even before this journalist left, while they were in the field, the places that they went to, we were in communication. Our team was in communication with them throughout, and then with the editorial process. So it's a very collaborative process throughout. And then not only do we publish the work on our site, but then we have strong relationships with publications throughout the African continent and in other parts of North America, building some in Europe. So on average, we did a project last year, for example, about water access in South Africa. And that project on average ran in about 12 other publications. So in other words, it's not just on our website. We do our best to spread the influence of and the impact of the work that the journalists we have the honor to work with and learn from as far and wide as possible. Does that answer the question?
Yes, of course. You said there's a follow-up question here. You said that you worked with Human Angle, an online-based investigative newspaper based in Abuja, the capital city of Nigeria. You said you worked with them. What kind of projects, what kind of reports have you worked with them on? And you also said you worked like on the editorial stuff. So does it mean that you pumped money into Human Angle, which means, or which gave you an access to control sort of the editorial part or arm of the newspaper? Is that what it is?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, very, very good question. So yeah, so the way this story came about in some ways illustrates the way that we work as a community. So in May 2021, Umar, I realized that we had grant funding for stories up to that point, and the team had kind of been on deadline for about 4 or 5 months in a row, but then there was sort of a lull. And so what I said to the team was, everybody has a chance to write your pitch. Give us your best pitches. We'll pick the stories together, and then we'll commission them and carry them out. And so through this, a young woman from China who was a data fellow, she wrote a pitch along with the other team members. It was the best pitch. It was about desertification in northern Nigeria due to climate change. Not so far from where you are in Kano.
Yeah.
Quite a little farther north, but not so far. So
yeah, which part of Nigeria was it?
It was right up there. I will show you. I will call up the. Let me call up the link right now while we're talking. So it was a beautiful story, and then we actually had a piece in the metaverse. So let me just call it up here. So what I would say though is that here we are. An encroaching desert intensifies Nigeria's farmer herder crisis. So let me just put the link in the chat. So it really was about looking at how the conflict between the farmers and the herders and how that had been intensifying because of the scarcity of water from climate change. There's an accountability angle. But the point is that story got approved by the team. And so then I said to the data fellow, you find the outlet to publish with. So she looked up, she researched Humangle, she reached out to the Humangle. I helped a little bit broker that relationship. And it was very much a joint collaboration that we worked editorially together. We made sure that people on both sides were comfortable. So it's not a matter of we're giving you the money, we control the editorial project. And in fact, I will say very candidly that what we try very hard to do is to create spaces where people feel comfortable saying honestly their reaction about the edits and about what's happening. And we acknowledge that some of our editors are from the United States. We know that there's history. Sometimes we're editing across culture, across race, across power differential. So I'm not saying we're perfect, but I am saying that we try to put that on the table and create a very open space. And we urge people very openly and say, this is something we're working on. We want to do this as well as possible. We have room to grow. So it's very much not that we commission the money and we control it, but that we want to make sure that it's a collaborative process.
All right. So in a simple term, you did not serve as controlling, manipulative, something like that, dictatorial, as in like you dictate to them what to do and what not to do. To be clear.
Yeah, no, we did not. What we did was we shared the pitch. We saw they of course looked at it. We looked at data, and then based on the data analysis that our team did, then they looked at different locations potentially to go. But in fact, to give you an example, they have a GIS expert, a mapping expert on their team. And so their mapping expert worked with our data fellow to do these very beautiful and powerful interactive visualization. So it was very much a collaborative process. It was not, we controlled it or manipulated or anything like that.
Excellent. I got a question from Musa Sunusi Ahmad. He's a journalist and a documentary expert.
Yeah.
He says, how does the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, CCIJ, get its funding?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So thank you. So we get funding basically in three different areas. The first area is foundations, philanthropic foundations. We get some support for general operating expenses, and then some is more project specific. So that's foundations, that's one bucket. Then we have individual donations. So we're part of this nonprofit group called the Institute for Nonprofit News. So we just, as part of that, we belong to and are able to participate in what's called the News Match fundraiser in November and December each year for the past 3 years. And so donations that we solicit, to a certain degree, they get matched. There's certain bonuses that are available. So we get money through individual donations. And then the third way is what's called earned revenue. So for example, we do some consulting with other organizations. We have served as a fiscal agent for other organizations, things like that. So those are basically the three different areas. And so a big part of what I do is try to think about how can we generate enough money to pay the journalists a respectable amount. We pay journalists in Africa the same amount as we pay journalists in Europe and in North America. We do that as a point of principle. We know a lot of places often pay African journalists less. We don't do that. And so that we can really bring the community to its fullest potential by having people be able to work on a full-time basis. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does answer. And may I know the amount that you pay each journalist? Funny.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We are just in the process of putting our pitch template up on the site. And I will say that we're very proud that we have a strong Nigerian presence in CCIJ. Our original social media editor and supervisor of interns was Rona Meyer. Vanessa Offiong is a very strong member of our community. Motunrayo Alaka is our founding board one of our founding board members, and secretary and our Africa editor is Ajibola Amzat. So we're very proud of our strong Nigerian presence within CCIJ, but it depends on the story. But we are posting a pitch template of what we look for in pitches. We do commission stories. So we do go up to 5,000 American dollars for a story. So that's a potential budget. So it depends, because we know people take several months to work on the story, and we want to pay them a reasonable amount.
Yeah, and many thanks indeed for letting me know this. And investigative journalism is something that is very expensive. It requires a great deal of money, a lot of money. And that's why and like, I have to recommend you, I mean, not recommend, like, thank you, or which word should I use? Compliment you for exhibiting this kind of equality in as in the amount of money you pay a European journalist is the same as the amount that you pay an African journalist, which is very much motivational and motivating as well, because like those journalists in Africa will just say, hey, we got to do this, of course, because these people are really into this business. Of course, that's great. So let me ask you this question. Still from Musa, he says, why is it that most investigative journalists in Africa focus on fact-checking rather than discovery? You got this question?
No, I hear the question. I understand. If I understand it correctly, it's about the emphasis on fact-checking as opposed to discovery. So that's a very big question. So I'd be interested in dialoguing with Musa and hearing what brings him to think and feel that way. What I would say is that in investigative journalism, fact-checking is absolutely critical, because you want to make sure that the information that you're bringing to light that bears your name and your organization's name and representing your family, your community, is as accurate as possible. And that's extremely important at any time. But I would suggest that it's become even more important in the past few years, when there's been all kinds of attacks on journalists and discrediting them and threatening them and the rhetoric of fake news. So I welcome the chance to talk with Musa and hear his thoughts
Yeah,
about
of course.
the emphasis on fact checking as compared to discovery. And I understand that there can be a concern when it goes too far in that direction. But I would say that journalists all over the world, and particularly investigative, but really everybody, you want to be as accurate as possible. So I think that's why investigative journalists take that so seriously. So a friend and basically a mentor of mine who's late, he said every time he did a big investigation, it was like cranking a piano above his head. And then you let it go. And then you just wait and see, is it going to come crashing down? And that inaccurate information that you didn't fact check enough, even though you tried, that's the piano. So it's very important that you try and get it right.
Yeah, I will set up a Zoom meeting, a conference call between you and I and him, so that we could talk in depth and in details as well.
Yeah, welcome them.
All right. Yeah. Briefly, let's move on. I would like to ask you these questions. First of all, briefly, let's talk about the qualities that a journalist, especially an upcoming journalist, needs to have before he or she becomes an investigative journalist.
Yeah, so I would say that the things that make for good journalism are the things, very much the same qualities that make for investigative journalism. I think with investigative journalism in particular, you want to be curious,